All right, welcome back, guys. Hope you've enjoyed this little time to discuss these things for your interest and your information. The big thing now is we've talked a lot about private equity. Who are they? What's an EBITDA? Is this right for you? The big thing now is what are the advantages and challenges if you decide that this is the route you want to go? So, Bill, tell us a little bit about what advantages people have if they go this route.
Yeah, yeah, and there certainly are. I would say, well, overwhelmingly, there's no question that one of the big advantages of private equity, but it certainly is not the only one, Dr. Carmen. And for some clients, to be quite honest, may not be even the most important one. But certainly at the very top of most everybody's list is the purchase price, the selling price that I'm probably going to receive in a private equity transaction. There's no question that if I sell my practice to private equity, I am probably, as we said earlier, I'm probably anticipating that I'm going to receive 35 to maybe 50% more than if I sell my practice to my associate or to my partners, or if I sell my practice to a colleague in the community. So in today's world, as we mentioned in earlier in the series, today's world, a private equity, a private peer-to-peer transaction, if I sell my practice to Mary Jones, I'm going to anticipate somewhere between 60, 62, maybe 65% of my revenue. So if I have $1 million practice, I should expect that my final negotiated purchase price will be 600, 620, could be more, could be 650, 660, but it'll be somewhere in that range. If I sell that same concomitant $1 million practice to private equity, I would anticipate that I'm going to receive 950 to $1.1 million, maybe even $1.2 million or greater. And so there's no question that what piques a lot of doctors' interest and what makes our phone ring is because a lot of our colleagues around the country have read or heard or been at a meeting and, hey, did you hear Dr. Carmen? I heard he sold his practice to XYZ private equity firm. Somebody told me he got twice his gross. Gee, what do you think about that? And the next thing you know, our phone is ringing. And so no question that an overwhelming advantage is the purchase price. Another huge advantage, and I would say if money is not the most important motivator, this certainly may be. I think some doctors get to a point, everyone gets to a point where they certainly enjoy the patient care. They love going in, they love just seeing their patients, having that extra time in the exam room to check them, see how their families are doing, their grandkids, their children, all of those things. Because you know, Dr. Carmen, being a practicing optometrist for several years, and my dad practiced for a long time, almost 50 years in Omaha. You build quite a relationship with people. You start your practice out, you meet, young families, and they become patients, and you go through the birth of their children and high school and college, and then they get married and they have grandkids, and you kind of have that whole circle of life with them. And so you develop these strong relationships, but always pulling somewhere at you at the back of your head is, how's my staff doing? I've got this problem, that problem. Exactly. Mary Jones didn't show up today for work. Mary Jones and Bob Smith are not getting along in the practice. I've got to deal with all that. I've got to worry about my inventory, my cost of goods, just all the different health insurance and vision plans. Am I in? Should I be in? Am I really making any money on this plan? It's how do I keep my book full? How do I market the practice? There's just a myriad of things. And at some point, you want to get rid of that. And Absolutely. So I would say probably the second huge advantage is that I am just going to be a doctor, do the kind of, if you will, the fun things that most ODs still love to do even late in their career, which is see and treat patients. So but getting rid of the management headaches, the fact that I don't have to think about CapEx anymore, capital expenditures. I'm not the person that has to worry about, gee, do I need to move? Do I need to knock this wall out, put another exam room in? Gee, do I need to upgrade my equipment? And I go to I go to Vision Expo, or I go to SECO, I go to my state association, and now, it's not, we're in a world where it's not uncommon to spend $90,000 or $95,000 for a piece of equipment in our practice. I want to stay, many states now, Alaska being one of the more recent, now has laser privileges in the state. Lasers are $55,000, $60,000. And there's a point at which you say, well, gee, if I'm only going to practice another year or two, do I want to spend $60,000 on a piece of equipment? All of those issues are gone for me. because that will be the purvey of private equity. So again, probably the three biggest advantages are I'll probably get a higher purchase price. And along with that purchase price, I'll most likely, perhaps, not always, but perhaps I'll get a second bite at the apple because some of the purchase price I can reinvest. I may have an opportunity to reinvest. And so when the private equity company sells or flips, I'll get a second bite at the apple. I can come in, I've got all the management headaches are virtually taken away from me. So now I can just come in and see patients. And then the enormous investment that it takes today to continue to keep a practice state of the art, I no longer have to make. That's the area that is something private equity will be responsible for. Those are probably the three main advantages.
I mean, private practice is not what it used to be when we all were practicing in the 90s.
Right.
And early 2000s. It was so much more fun and you didn't have to worry about insurances and all like this. So getting rid of those headaches is huge.
Yeah.
And a lot of us aren't ready to just walk away. So working for somebody else makes a lot of sense.
It sure
But
can.
that's the advantages. Now there's obviously disadvantages with everything.
Yes.
So what do you see as the biggest disadvantage?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dr. Carmen, and you're quite right. And for my dad, he practiced in the 60s and 70s as well. And he said, before the kind of the advent of contacts and all the commercialization, said, if you just showed up every day, did a good job, had the hush puppies clean, the white belt on, did a good job for people, you were successful. But practicing optometry today, those things, there's a lot more things that you have to do in order to be really successful. What are the disadvantages? There's probably two overwhelming disadvantages. One is that you're going to have to remain for a period of 3 to 5 years. A general rule of thumb for our listeners today, the larger the metropolitan area, the more negotiation room we have on the length of time you'll need to stay. And you practiced for many years in the Atlanta metropolitan area, obviously a huge city, a tremendous amount of young ODs working in Atlanta. So if you had sold to private equity, to probably find you a replacement in a 2 to 3 year period wouldn't be difficult. If you're practicing in small town North Dakota, small town Wyoming, that can be very challenging to find a young OD, you're probably going to have to stay 5 years. And that probably will not be negotiable because private equity is well aware that finding a doctor in a small rural community in western Nebraska could take some time. So one of the challenges is that you'll be required to work for a period of time, maybe more than you even want to. And it's not inconceivable that some of your payout could be tied to your working. In other words, if you leave your employment contract, which you can do, you may leave some substantial amount of the money on the table. So that for some doctors, that's a big disadvantage. As I mentioned in one of the earlier series, I had a colleague the other day that we're engaged with, and he just was very candid. He just said, don't even tell me about private equity. I know a fair amount about it. And the one thing he said that I'm not interested in is working past June. So for me, it wouldn't work because I know they would require 3 to 5 years. That's an advantage. Here's another one, and this is this is very subjective. This is one I'm going to throw it out there, and I just don't know, how definitive, we can answer this, but because I don't think any optometrist knows the answer to this. Dr. Carmen, how long did you own your practice?
35 years.
35 years. So in 35 years, you never had a boss. You were your boss, right?
Right.
If you want to take a long weekend off, and
you just told the front desk and scheduled.
You just told the front desk, hey, I'm going to be gone on Friday and Monday, so I'm taking a long weekend. Don't schedule any patients. And the only person you had to worry about and answer to for that decision was yourself.
Yeah.
But in private equity, you now work for somebody. Though that you close on a Friday, and when you come back in on Monday, you are no longer an owner of your business. You're an employee of it. You're no different than the contact lens tech, the front desk person, the opticians, et cetera. And to be frank, some people do really well with that. They realize that the trade-off for that is, of course, getting 40 to 50 or 60% more money than they would have ever gotten, plus this kind of second bite at the apple. And so they realize that being an employee is a lot different than being a practice owner. To be honest and frank, some doctors don't do very well with it. But to be honest with you, some doctors don't do well with that even in a peer-to-peer transaction. One of my oldest friends and clients in optometry sold his practice, and he had a contract to stay on for a year, a couple or 3 days a week, and I think maybe made it 60 days. He just wasn't a person who could really work for anyone else. And so that can be a big challenge. And then along with that, kind of, if that is 2A, 2B, or number, because it's kind of tied into that, is by being an employee, I lose control. I don't make the determination about what frames we're going to buy. I don't make the determination if I'm going to upgrade my GDX or my OCT or get a new OptoMap. I don't make the decision about maybe a year before I sold to private equity. The staff and I made a decision to change software. So now we've had a new software platform in the practice for a year and a half, and now we're using it. We understand it, and now I sell my practice to private equity, and 6 months later they want to put a new software in, and I'll have, to be frank, very little to say about whether that will happen or not. So I think the three biggest disadvantages, or maybe better said, challenges, is that I'm going to be an owner. I'm not long going to be an owner. I'm going to be an employee, and that brings in a myriad of things. I'm going to have to work maybe longer than I really want to. And again, the smaller the area, the smaller geographic area, probably the less negotiation room you'll have on that. Larger metropolitan areas where there's a pretty good adequate supply of young optometrists who would be happy to come in and work. That may make that a little bit more negotiable. Where there's this smaller dearth of optometrists, that can be more difficult. And then losing control, giving up. This is most optometrists, especially optometrists in solo practice. Many optometrists, their practice it's like a child. They birth it, they nurture it, it grows, it develops. It has a really, really strong emotional quality to it. I'm sure Tim Cook at Apple, the CEO and chairman of Apple, I'm sure he's very emotionally invested in the success of Apple, but not in the same way that you were vested in your business, and mainly because as a doctor, your primary responsibility is the treatment and wellness of your patients. And that has a very strong emotional component. And that can be very hard to let go of, especially if you think the new organization is making some decisions that you wouldn't have made. Now, I would also argue that, there are some really great things that private equity brings. They have tremendous resources. They have state-of-the-art people in coding and billing. They have incredible buying power to control cost of goods, things that I, as an individual, even in a fairly large group practice, aren't able to do. I think those are also advantages as well.
I'd also add to that too, is they can bring in like benefits for your staff and employees that you haven't been able to offer.
Great
So
point.
a lot of times the staff don't necessarily resent this because they're actually getting pretty much their same offer or contract that you were paying them, but then they'll also get some benefits with it that maybe you weren't supplying.
That's a very good point, Dr. Carmen. Yeah, I might end up, I might be in a practice that just doesn't offer much in terms of health insurance or pension, retirement benefits, but I get a full slate of benefits when I now because your staff becomes an employee of the private equity firm as well. And in some cases, and I think this is really important if we have any listeners today who are fairly far down the road with private equity, I think something that's really important when you mention to your staff that you're in the process of selling to private equity, I think it's important that there often can be, we've had several clients where they've had extremely sharp, let's just, for lack of a better term, office managers or office administrators have found employment with the private equity firm. And so there's some advancement in opportunities when you work for a company that has 2,500 employees as opposed to 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 employees. You're right. So it can be very advantageous from a benefit standpoint for your staff. And I think that's a big advantage that you're able to offer things to your staff that perhaps I just couldn't do as a small business owner.
Right. And I think you're right, as far as doctors do feel a real attachment and ownership to their patients. And we do feel a responsibility. So one nice thing is you'll be able to be there through the transition. And you're not just walking away from the patients. You have time to prepare them that eventually you are leaving. You're not just walking out the door, and you can let them know when it's appropriate that you're actually doing this and moving on. Some private equities you can actually sell and the patient's not even aware of it. Others totally change it from day one. So that was one of the things we were talking about, is the type of private equity you sell to will affect your patients too.
Yes, and many of the private equities sometimes describe it as kind of a soft touch. They don't want a large imprimatur of theirs onto the practice. They want the brand, if you will, the culture of the practice to remain the same, so that it is seamless to the patient that there's really been any change in ownership. And I think you bring up a very good point, that the fact that I am going to transition for 3 to 5 years really gives me an opportunity, because sometimes, many times, in just a peer-to-peer transaction, when Sally Jones buys my practice, I might work a day a week for 6 months and then I'm out. And there have been some cases where a young doctor buys a practice, and the last day that I'm there is the closing day, and I don't have really an opportunity to have some closure and transition my patients. I just hand the keys over and I get my check, but I'm out of the practice, and that can be a very abrupt change for some. So I would argue what some people see as a negative, I see it as a very positive thing, that I have a nice 3 to 5 year runway to not only prepare my patients, but frankly, prepare myself.
Absolutely.
Because most ODs don't walk away from their practice easily, and so but I think initially most ODs would look at that as a challenge. So thank you, Dr. Carmen.
Sure, really thank you. If anybody has any questions or want to talk any more about any of these, reach out. Both Bill and myself are available at any time, and we appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Carmen, have a great day.
You too.